A big question that comes up between Jews and Christians and Muslims is who was sacrificed, or who was to be sacrificed in terms of the sons of Abraham. We know that the Jews and the Christians say that it was Isaac that was supposed to be sacrificed, and then he was replaced by an animal. And the Muslims are the ones saying, no, it was actually Ishmael. So this is a debate, and let's take a look at the Bible and notice a few things. Now, I do know that the Bible does declare outright that it was Isaac that was to be sacrificed, but it does seem as if, from the Muslim perspective, it definitely seems as if the text was tampered and changed. Let's take a look at why that might be the case. It mentions in Genesis 16:16 that Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar was born. When Hagar bore him Ishmael, so he was 86 when his first son Ishmael was born. Okay, good. Then it says in Genesis 21:5 that Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. So that means they had a 14-year age gap between them. Then it says that the child, this is in now Genesis 21:8-13, it mentions, the child grew up and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. So this is talking about now that the child was weaned. Weaning takes 2 years. So you have now Isaac 2 years old, therefore obviously Ishmael is going to be 16. It says, but Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son, but God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. This is very interesting. So now we have Abraham being told, get rid of Hajar or Hagar and Ismail or Ishmael, get rid of them, send them off into the desert, and he is 16 years old when this is taking place. But what makes this odd is that a 16-year-old is in what? Grade, I think, 11, grade 12, around there. Basically a full man, essentially. I mean, I deal with young 16-year-olds in classes, and I teach them and stuff, and I can see that these kids, they can drive, they have sometimes full beards, and yet it seems odd that the story continuously describes this as a baby. Genesis 21:14 says that she carried this boy, this apparently 16-year-old boy, when he was being sent out into the desert. If you look at the contemporary English version, it says, early the next morning, Abraham gave Hagar an animal skin full of water and some bread. Then he put the boy on her shoulder and sent them away to wander in the desert. Put the 16-year-old boy on a mother's shoulders? Seems odd. In the Brenton Septuagint translation, it says, and Abraham rose up in the morning and took loaves and skin and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, and he put the child on her shoulder. So you see over and over again that the child is being put on the shoulders, but a 16-year-old boy doesn't go on mom's shoulders. Maybe a child does, like a baby, an infant, maybe a toddler, but not a 16-year-old boy. Furthermore, in Genesis 21:15-19, it says, when the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bowshot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. That sounds like she's dealing with a baby that's crying, that's going hungry or thirsty. That you take the baby because it's crying and you can't bear to see it cry, so you place it under a bush. When you talk like that, it sounds like a baby, not a grown adult young boy, 16 years old. And as she sat there, she began to sob, and God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying, and as he lies there, lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. This is very interesting. We have God declaring that Ishmael will become a great nation, his descendants, and we know that his descendants were the Arabs. That's really interesting because the Arabs, they were either idolaters or they embraced Islam and believed in one God, the God of Muhammad, the God of Abraham as well. So when exactly were they a blessed nation? Was it when they were monotheists, just like Abraham, or was it when they were polytheists? It seems like an interesting situation. Furthermore, it says what? that lift the boy up. Does mom lift up a 16-year-old boy? It'd be very, very difficult for a mother to do that. It sounds like she's talking about a young child. Furthermore, in Genesis 22, 1-2, it says, sometime later God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, to whom you love. And then it says Isaac. It's inserted. It's like dash, Isaac, dash. I found that very interesting. It almost looks like it was inserted as an extra statement. And then it says, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. So it's very fascinating to me that it's the son that was sacrificed is described as an only son. It would make a lot of sense if all of this took place when, for example, he was sent off into the desert, not when Ishmael was already born, but actually when he was a baby, when he was young, when he was smaller, because that's how the story sounds like it's talking about it. And furthermore, it would make a lot of sense if God says, sacrifice your only son, when he was actually the only son, because only the firstborn child can ever be the only son. After that child is born, every other subsequent child is not going to be the only son. That's also what it says, mentioned in Genesis 22, 10-12, it mentions, then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son, but the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. So this is really, really interesting, that it keeps on mentioning the only son. It seems like the story was meant for, in terms of being taken into the desert, it seems like it was a story about a baby or a toddler, not a grown kid. And it seems very odd. Furthermore, there is something in the Bible that is talking about the right of the firstborn. It seems that there is a right of the firstborn that cannot be shaken, even if you look down upon that child. Even if you say, oh, well, this is the child of a slave woman, and well, it doesn't matter because the firstborn is the firstborn. Where does this mention this? It actually mentions it in Deuteronomy 21, 15-17. It says, if a man has two wives and he loves one but not the other, and both bear him sons, which is really exactly what happened to Abraham, quite interesting how specific it is, but the firstborn is the son of the wife he does not love. Now, he loved Hagar and he loved his son Ishmael, but even if you, for whatever reason, want to shun that child, when he wills his property to his sons, he must not give the rights of the firstborn to the son of the wife he loves in preference to his actual firstborn. In other words, the firstborn must maintain the rights of the firstborn. There seems to be this emphasis there. So to say, well, he wasn't a legitimate son, he was a legitimate son. He was the son of Hagar and Abraham, and that was the actual firstborn, and he has the rights that he deserves. The son of the wife he does not love. So then it says, he must acknowledge the son of his unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double share of all he has. That son is the first sign of his father's strength. The right of the firstborn belongs to him. So it seems very emphatic that the firstborn deserves the right of the firstborn. Now, some might say that, well, he wasn't a legitimate wife. Well, if that's the case, then why does the Bible call him his wife? Not concubine, not slave girl. It says the wife when it says Genesis 16:3. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. So it specifically mentions them as a wife. This is very interesting. It's very interesting that if he was the cursed son or the illegitimate son, why is there so much emphasis on the fact that Ishmael was blessed and his nation, the nation underneath him, will be blessed? For example, Genesis 17:18 says, and Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. So he's actually praying for his son as well. So this is very interesting, that there's this idea that no, the firstborn or the right of the firstborn got passed to the second one. Why would you believe that if there's so much emphasis that the firstborn has to be treated as the firstborn, has to have that right, has to have that honor? If the story doesn't seem to really add up and make sense, that he was supposed to be this baby, but at the same time it's describing a 16-year-old. It seems like maybe some of the text has been messed with. Furthermore, the idea that Sarah is more legitimate is also in question. Why? Because in Genesis 20:12, it says, Abraham said about Sarah, besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. So this is describing Abraham marrying his half-sister. We don't believe this as Muslims, that any prophet would marry his that this would happen, that Ibrahim alayhi salam did this. But it is mentioned in the Bible that he married his sister. Now, what's also interesting is that the Bible also says in Deuteronomy 27:22, cursed is anybody who sleeps with his sister, the daughter of his father, or the daughter of his mother. So how are we going to believe that Abraham, who is this blessed individual, who's going to have blessed offspring, right? He has a firstborn, and we as Muslims believe that the firstborn, everybody believes that the firstborn was Ishmael, but that he was the one to be sacrificed because the one who was going to be sacrificed was his firstborn. How do Christians reconcile this? They say, oh, well, it said firstborn, but it really meant the second one because that was the only legitimate one. How would that be the only legitimate one when technically that marriage was a marriage that was technically incestuous, and now the blessing comes from there? Seems very odd. And just as some final logical points, the fact that the Arabs maintain a yearly commemoration since way, way back, even since before the time of the Prophet Muhammad, the fact that they maintained a yearly commemoration of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son, who became their father, the father of the Arabs, Ishmael, gives credibility to their story, especially given that the Jews have no such annual practice. So it seems that the Arabs really put a lot of emphasis on this and turned this into an annual thing about their ancestry and about where they came from. And furthermore, just logically speaking, which is the greater sacrifice? Trying to have children until you're an old man, and then finally getting one, and then being asked to sacrifice that child, yes, that's a huge sacrifice. Or trying to have children until you're an old man, and then finally getting two, and then being asked to sacrifice the second one. Clearly, it seems that the greater sacrifice is to sacrifice the only son, and the only one that can be the only son is the first one. I hope everybody understands the logic there. So clearly there's something going on here that does not seem to add up, and that, I believe, gives legitimacy to the Islamic belief, the Muslim belief, that it was indeed Ismail alayhi salam, the prophet Ishmael, who was to be sacrificed, and God knows best. Someone might ask the question, why would the Jews change their scripture? We'll get into how authentic the Bible is later. We're going to do a series on that, or a portion on that momentarily. But just to answer that question, it seems that part of the Jewish tradition is to put a lot of emphasis on bloodline and lineage. So from that perspective, it doesn't seem that unfathomable or unbelievable that somebody might change the text to make it look like their bloodline was even more holy and even more special because it was from their bloodline, their father, Isaac, was supposed to be sacrificed, and they were miraculously saved, and therefore their entire progeny and their entire lineage was a gift from God. That is not so hard to believe if there is so much emphasis on lineage, which Judaism does have. So if anybody's wondering about what is the motivation behind this, hopefully you can see where the motivation would come from. Assalamu alaikum.